Welcome to the channel, guys. I'm Danny Malcolm, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the hips and the pelvis and how we'd like them to work in the golf swing. Now this is a topic that is very interesting for me, as it's something that I've really struggled with physically and throughout my playing career. So let's get into it. I mean, how are the hips really supposed to work? Well, firstly, it starts from having a good setup position. So at address, what you'd like to see is just a nice athletic setup position. So what I mean by that is not being too flexed in their knees, whereby you've got your hips or your pelvis very sort of flat here, and also you don't want to be too sort of excessive with the butt sticking out, too straight legs. You just want to be nice and athletic here, nice softness in the knees and a nice neutral pelvis to start with. So most players will have, or most tall players have, a fairly level to slightly lead hip higher setup position depending on their club of choice, but from there what you'd then see in the backswing is a nice athletic move. So just imagine you just throwing a golf ball. It's just something so, a tennis ball, something so natural that you'd do. If you was going to do a move in the backswing to throw that, you'd load up onto that right side and really push off and create some force from the ground up. What you wouldn't do in that backswing, or if you're throwing a ball, is load up whereby your weight goes onto the outside of your foot, your hip sways, and then you can't apply any back force or any balance from there anyway. So that's just something to note in the golf swing, because a big thing that we see, particularly in that backswing, is the pelvis or the hip working too far this way, which we'd call a sway, and the weight starts to work on the outside of the right foot. Very hard to load up from there, very difficult to create force and good sequencing in the downswing. So the first thing to look at with the hips is how do they work in the backswing. Well, the hips are an oval shape, and so what you'd see from address, a couple of things. Some players like to start with a little bit of a bump to start with, a little bit of a shift there to the right, and then they'll start to rotate. So as the hips do rotate, if that was your right hip joint, left hip joint, that right hip joint would actually work backwards and up. So it'll work back and up slightly, and it'll actually work behind you. So you might actually see, if you used to draw a line on a camera and you had this sort of a line here from your right hip down to your ankle, you might actually see a little bit of daylight come between there and that line in the backswing, unless you're a player that just bumps across a little bit and then rotates there. So that's what you'd like to see, as opposed to that sway or too much of this. So that right hip will actually, or the trail hip will actually work that a little bit higher, again given it's an oval shape. It'll start to work in this sort of fashion. What you want to feel, I'm all about feelings in the golf swing, so you want to feel as you rotate into that right side, you're actually going into what we call internal rotation with that right hip. So as you work into that, you want to feel this little bit of so you imagine you've got this crease here in your hip. As you turn into that right hip, you should feel that close a little bit, so you get this bit of a squeeze there. Not only that, you'd also like to feel a little bit of pressure in your glute, like sitting into that glute. So you're really storing that energy in the backswing, much like if you're just throwing that ball. You'd be here, bang, ready to push off. Tennis, forehand shot in tennis, bang, same again. You wouldn't be here, or you wouldn't start from there. So try and make it as athletic as possible. You know, oftentimes if I'm coaching beginner golfers, the first thing I just get them to try and be as athletic as possible, move as quick as they can, just make it naturally athletic, and then you can work more on positions and so forth. But that's what you'd like to feel in that trail hip in the backswing. What things to look out for? A couple of things is having too much knee flex on the way back, which is going to restrict your ability to turn, and straightening up too much. Now that's not the worst thing in the world, because players that might have some hip limitations and some tightness in there, oftentimes just straightening that trail leg a little bit can help you get a bit more depth in those hips, but you might lose that bit of pressure and that bit of pressure into the ground and into the glute here. So if anything, you kind of like to see your right knee pretty much over your ankle there in the backswing, or if anything, a little bit straighter. Not ideal, but that's my preference. But if you are going to do anything, don't do that. Go a little bit straighter if you need to get a bit more depth in those hips. So that's the backswing. That's loading up, putting yourself in a powerful position. Now the downswing starts really from the ground up. So if you imagine something we call the kinematic sequence, without getting too much into that, maybe for another video, but you've got to think the sequencing of your swing is so important. So all these golf swings you see on TV, the best players in the world, they've all got their own styles of swing, but the sequencing of it is very, very, very similar. So what I mean by that is when we've rotated to the top with our hips, you'll see that downswing or transition or the downswing would start with the hips first. So they would start moving towards the target first. Then the chest would start to rotate, then the shoulders, then the lead arm, then the wrists and club, and eventually into the ball. So if that's a bit out of sequence, it's a big source of power or loss of power if you've not got that sequence correctly. So I like to think of it a little bit like a race. If you was having a 100-meter race and you had, let's say, just 4 things. In the blocks there you had your hips, then you had your chest, then you had your shoulders, then you had your lead arm, for example. So the shotgun goes off and the hips are out of the blocks first. So they go out first. So they're shifting towards the target first. Bang. Then the chest goes out the blocks. And what it does, it's almost like the hips have gone ahead and then the chest pulls onto the hips to try and get it to catch up, to catapult it forward a bit. So the chest goes, then the shoulders go out the blocks, and then the shoulders grab onto the chest, who's been propelled forward by the hips, and then the shoulders start to create some momentum. Then the lead arm goes out of the blocks there, and that grabs onto the shoulders, which is grabbed onto the chest, which is grabbed onto the hips, and you get this almost like catapult effect, and that's how we create that speed into the ball. So the sequencing is so important. It's so important that we start it with the hips. Now there's a good way to start it and a bad way to start it with the hips. The good way is once you make that transition is to get that pressure into that lead foot into the ground and get those hips just moving laterally towards the target here. And you can see how I've kind of kept my back a little bit towards the target as well. So it's there, bang. So you get that first move with the hips, then you can start to get the chest opening, shoulders, arms, and so on. But just looking at the hips only, once you've got that bump across there, so we've started from a backswing where the trail hip has been that little bit higher, and an average for the best players in the world in the backswing is about 10 degrees up here with that right hip. But then as they transition and get into impact, at impact, their right hip actually gets lower by about 10 degrees into impact, and then through into the finish. So it gets this kind of action there. What they don't do, and something to look out for, which is very common, is this right hip launching high and forward. So what I mean by that, if we get into this backswing position here, if you get too high, for example, and then the downswing, in an effort to create power, we try and think, oh, we've got to get this weight forward. And you get this spinning this way. The right hip goes forward, it goes high, and there's really nowhere you can go from here. It's not a great position. It's not a powerful position. And it's all pretty armsy from there. So what you want to feel, if you're a player that does that, a great drill, is to take your normal address position, get yourself a good couple of feet wider, so it's really wide here, and make some swings where you get to the top, and in transition, you just get yourself to drag that foot along the ground without the heel coming off or the foot coming off, and you get into this sort of position. So when you're in impact, you've got that right hip slightly lower, level to slightly lower, and you feel there's a bit of a squeeze in your glutes as well. So you're really getting that pressure into your glutes, into impact, that nice squeeze, rather than that sort of action there. So again, that drill is nice and wide with the stance, get to the top, and then from here, right foot slides, and you see how this right hip gets a bit lower, bang, into impact, and then you can rotate on through. So that's the kind of move in transition. And then how to clear the hips just finally is, now I mean, we look at the best players in the world, and these guys are superhuman oftentimes, and you see the hips some of them, the hips are here at impact, and some things that we just don't really want to recreate. Our bodies can't necessarily do that. So for you and I, if we can just feel that in transition, we've loaded up nicely and we've got a nice pressure shift in transition. So our hips have kind of bumped across, and now you feel a bit of weight into this left side. Now from here, you see the best players in the world at impact, the lead leg would be straight. That's a result. They've not just spun the hips and straightened that leg. There's no power in that, and it can mess out your sequence, and then it'll just be your arms coming at the ball. That happens as a result of using the ground effectively and clearing their chest through the shot. So what it looks like from front on, get to the top of the swing from here, nice shift across. The more you push into the ground there, the more I'm pushing into that lead foot, the more that ground pushes back, and that will actually naturally, just through natural cause and effect, will help clear my hips. It'll help me generate power through to the club. So it's here, and then you're pushing off that ground, clears the hip, chest opens, and then we can push off to a full through finish. And you'll see, I mean, a lot of players, some of them, the foot's even coming off the ground, which is great. That's athletic, that's how you create power. But you want your hips to clear as a result of good things happening. It's not just putting it into a position. So again, from here, good move to the top, nice powerful move, shift across, and then it's pushing off the ground, feeling this squeeze with that drill we did before, and then hips will clear, and they'll clear to whatever degree your body will go, and depending on the shot shape you're trying to hit. But from here, bang, up to a full finish. Nice, powerful, athletic move. So I'll go through that with an actual swing. So we've got a good setup position to start with. Nice neutral setup position, not too flexed, not too straight and bum sticking out. Nice and athletic. And then from here, we're going to load up into that right side. Right knee is pretty much over my ankle, feeling the pressure in my glute and a little bit of tightness in there. And then from here, shift across and then push, and that's going to help me clear my hips and let the club be delivered. So let's have a go here. So up and through. So that's the feeling that you want to create that power. We'll go again. And I'll just show you what you don't want to do. Now from the top, you don't want to just spin. You don't just want to spin and clear your hips, because I can send it out of sequence a bit too much, and you can then get the club firing out too much here, using very much just the arms. Or if they spin too much too early, then they might stop, and then you've got to catch up. So this is where you get those impact positions where your hips look like where they were at address, and then the arms have just got to take over because they're just trying to catch up, and then you get flippy ones and all sorts from there. So you can see the importance of the hips and the pelvis to create good sequencing, good power, and some good positions in the swing. So we'll finish with one more. So good setup position, get to the top. I'm going to create that power, that shift across and then pushing off the ground, and that should just naturally clear those hips for me. So I hope that helps. Some ideas of how we'd like the hips to work in the golf swing. I got out of breath there. You can see the kind of pressure I was using there in that lower half, the bigger muscles to create power in the golf swing rather than just the arms. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please like and subscribe to the channel by clicking the button below. Lots more great content to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.